before we begin, sorry. So before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that as scattered as we are connected for this session as organizers in the UBC Vancouver community. The UBC Vancouver campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. They have been here since time immemorial, and we who reunite on this land are forever indebted to them. We must, as organizers, communities, and individuals, take action to help fight against the ongoing violence that Indigenous communities face, including their fight against the fossil fuel industry. We specifically want to mention the incredible work that Indigenous youth are doing for our future. Over the weekend, Braided Warriors held an action against TMX and faced police violence as a result. And you can learn more from the link that Rachel will provide in the chat. And if you want to learn more about the connection between climate justice and policing, you can check out the recording for an event we did last semester. Rachel will drop the link for that in the chat as well. And we also want to be perfectly clear, there is no climate justice without racial justice. There is no climate justice without Indigenous sovereignty and Black liberation. For those of us who are settlers, we need to hold ourselves accountable and recognize how our place on this land maintains colonial dynamics in Canada. We have a responsibility to unlearn harmful ideologies and understand the connection between the settler colonial system and the acceleration of climate change. We also want to be really clear and highlight the importance of Black liberation and how that plays in our vision for a just future. And we want to remind everyone that we must take an intersectional approach to addressing these issues. We hope that this is something folks also keep in mind as we hear from our speakers today. And we'll be learning about urban planning, racial justice, and climate change. And we want to remind folks to ground our understanding of these issues on land and people. And to learn more about the territory on which you reside and its traditional owners, you can visit nativeland.ca, and Rachel will also be providing that link in the chat. So officially, you're welcome to our event, Envisioning a Just City. As you know, we'll be talking about racial and climate justice in urban planning, and we just want to acknowledge the folks that have been working together to make this event possible. So this event has been brought to you by the collaborative efforts of the UBC Climate Hub, which is a student-led initiative that aims to connect and empower university and community stakeholders to take bold climate action for a just future. And also UBC Capacity, which is a student-led initiative that aims to bring together undergraduate students interested in just and equitable city planning and its various branches. And lastly, UBC SCARP Students Association. The School of Community and Regional Planning at UBC is one of the first dedicated planning schools in Canada, which offers 6 decades of experience in graduate planning, education, and research. And finally, we're very grateful for the support of the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions, PICS. Without their support, this event and the showcase series would not be possible. And I believe Rachel will also drop their link in the chat. But finally, I'll hand it over to Karen now to introduce our speakers.
Hi, my name is Karen. I'm the engagement coordinator at UBC Capacity, and it is my pleasure to introduce our 3 panelists for the evening. First, we have Celia Joseph. Celia is a Squamish, 𝗠𝗴𝗴𝗶𝗲, British, and Jewish. She is a graduate of the First Nations and Indigenous Studies program at UBC and cares deeply about decolonial and intersectional approaches to learning and caring for one another. Celia is the executive director of 𝗠𝗴𝗴𝗶𝗲 𝗟ci𝘄, a Squamish nonprofit focused on language revitalization. She is also part owner of a business called Host Consulting Incorporation, which is a Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh consultancy focused on public art decolonial dialogues. Celia, would you like to share with us your thoughts on the connections between climate justice, urban planning, and racial justice? How do these issues intersect?
Tanoia, 𝗠𝗴𝗴𝗶𝗲 𝗟ci𝘄. Celia Joseph, Quian Sna, Stahealot, Quian Quishamin, Ants Squamish, Snanemo, British Jewish. Tanachin Statmas O Homeo, not Squamish. Yuan Hathan Squallowin, 𝗠𝗴𝗴𝗶𝗲 𝗟ci𝘄 not to meo, not to chamasquiam, a slewat all a schopmistalmo. Yuan hot, snowild, tinat, on huelwas, quins, what to quiet to hot, snowild, tuknam, eoch to panelists. Chinquan mentomiap, tomatoquetzian snachum. So hello everybody, my name is Celia Joseph and my ancestral name is 𝗠ป์𝗴𝗴𝗶𝗲 𝗟ci𝘄. My family comes from the ancestral village of Stotmas up in the Squamish Valley. My parents are Eve Joseph and my mom, she is a poet and she lives on the island and she's of British and Jewish descent. And my father, 𝗠ป์𝗴𝗴𝗶𝗲 𝗟ci𝘄 Joseph, he is a master carver who lives in the 𝗏 Reserve or the Capilano Reserve in North Vancouver. And I just wanted to raise my hands to my fellow hosts, to the ancestors from all three host nations. And in my teachings, when we gather, we speak to the ancestors first in the language that they remember, so they don't have to work so hard to continue to watch over our territory. And in those moments, they don't have to work so hard to understand what's going on. And we can just speak right to them and pray right to them and thank them and honor them first. And that's how we get work started. So yeah, I wanted to start that way and share a little bit of 𝗏mish snachum. And I also just want to raise my hands to all of you organizers for putting together such a thoughtful grouping of panelists and for your outreach and your advocacy, and to everybody who had it in their hearts and the curiosity in their minds to come listen to us put thoughts down. This is an exciting topic. And for me, it comes at an interesting time in my life as a young language learner. That's been a big part of my journey for the last several years now. And it's been really connecting me to place in a way that is hard to describe in English. And then it brings me to this intersection of just having created with two other women, one from Musqueam, Faith Sparrow, one from Tsleil-Waututh, Jade George, a consultancy to get to the bottom of these questions that are being posed here around what it means to envision a just city and what it means to, as MST people, to see ourselves reflected back at us in this city, to be able to bend time in a non-linear way and think of this city looking like it used to look and looking like it's supposed to look, and thinking about time and space where ancestors can walk through this land and find pieces of themselves in it, but then they also can see all of the seeds that they've planted for us when they dreamed of something different for us and dreamed of beautiful futures for us, that they could see that too, all in one space. And so my envisioning for the city is non-linear in that it's a culmination of where we've come from and where we're going, both as host nations, as Indigenous people, and then also as a general Vancouver community of people who live here now. So because I was partially invited to sit on this panel to talk a little bit about the work that Host is doing, I want to let you know who we are. So Host Consulting is a dream, and it's a amalgamation of various different paths that the three of us have been taking up until this point. And it started as a dream on a beach in the summer that was actually most kind of tangibly inspired by what was happening in the spring and summer around Black Lives Matter. And we were so inspired by the work that Cicely Blaine was doing with their consulting company. And they had just executed the Stratagem conference. Was anybody at the Stratagem conference? Hey, there's a few of you there. Yes, I see some yeses. So it was a critical race conference around anti-Black violence and intersections and futures, and it was just so beautiful and such amazing offerings. And I learned so much, and I was actually asked to speak at that as well, thinking about relationships of solidarity and intersectionality. And Faith and I, we were sitting on that beach thinking like, oh my goodness, like if Cicely can carve out this space for themselves and create such amazing dialogues and medicines, it's like we have to follow their lead. And it just let us dream out loud about creating spaces to have dialogues around our three nations and the future of the city and the future of our people and the importance of representation and how our ancestors dance and our unborn ones dance when they hear our language be spoken. It's just all connected. And so from what we saw happening with Cicely Blaine Consulting, we really felt so inspired, and we're going to actually be doing a workshop for them in next week. And so I can't wait I don't think that Cicely knows how impactful their work has been on the seeds that Host is planting, but I can't wait to share in reciprocity, by showing up for them, because they've shown up so much for the Black community and beyond, and certainly the Indigenous community here in Vancouver. And so even just sitting down to have a conversation around like intersections of racial justice when it comes to climate justice, you can't even separate these dialogues. Wow. Okay. So I just had a 1 minute warning, and I'm still still giving the shout outs in the introduction of who I am. Let's see what I can cover in a minute. Basically, the work that we're trying to do at Host Consulting and thinking about what it means to break down like these classic jobs of who is a planner and who gets to have input at the table about what a city looks like and how we operate. What we're trying to do at Host Consulting through decolonial dialogues and workshops and presentations and public art facilitation is to see ourselves reflected back at us on our own land. And the city for many years it's been a homogenizing place for Indigenous people that clumps us all into one and it has pushed aside Salish design, and it has welcomed Northern design, and it has pushed aside the work of weavers, and it has internalized gendered notions of arts and craft, and it has homogenized us to the point that you can be in the city but not know where you are. You can land in the Vancouver airport and you can see Musqueam weavings, but it's amidst every other nation ever's art, and it's an important as a meeting space. Like Hamulchstin, the name of the Capilano Reserve, it means like that place where the water mixes, and I think of that here, of like how important it is to have this broad representation of of BIPOC people and people that have come from all different walks. But I think as this talk of like what binds our work and how it relates to this talk is you have to know whose house you're in to know how to take care of it. And I think because the city has done such a good job of making you forget where you are, because if you remind people whose house you're in, then you gotta, then like rent is due, you know, like once you say whose house you're in, then the rent is due. And so it's a conversation that's been tabled for so long. But the real medicine work is like when you're willing to like pay that rent, and it's not so literal as like cash in hand, but maybe it looks like land back, or maybe it looks like time, or maybe it looks like investment. There's all these ways that paying your rent can look like. But once you're willing to do that as it relates to climate, then you start to connect with the caretakers of the house, the people who have been looking after it for generations, and you start to unlock the keys to how to live here in a sustainable way that is where you how to thrive here in a way that you know that your children can too, and their children can, and their children can, because you're unlocking the keys that are all over. It's like if you think of like geocaching and how there's like all these little buried treasures all throughout this city. Well, those are the teachings that the ancestors have left for us about how to care for this land. They know the secrets of where the waterways used to be, and they know all the stories that this land carries. And so if you pay your rent and you know whose house you're in, and then you can start to create that pointed dialogue about how to take care of this place, how to advocate for this place. And the late Leonard George from Tsleil-Waututh, who was such a amazing and influential leader and elder on the West Coast, comes from a very prolific family, the George family from Tsleil-Waututh. I remember seeing a conversation around whose responsibility climate justice was in the city. And I think there's been a lot of hurt from MST communities about being erased on their own land. And I remember him chiming into that conversation and just saying like, we've got you. Like, you're here now, which means like you're part of the fight. You're part of the struggle. And it's like, as much as this is my job, this is your job, because you're here now, you know, like our beautiful homelands have pulled you in. They have mesmerized you, our mountains and our sea and our animals. It's like, they've all called you here. And now it's your onus to think about walking in these territories in a way that honors your hosts, you know, walking in our home in a way that aligns with our thoughts around how we relate to this space, how we care for this space, and what it means to earn your keep. You know, there's so many different ways to pay rent, and in my mind, like how you earn your keep is through just learning different ways to walk, to walk gently and to be generous with your time. And part of what Host is trying to do is to help people like find those keys, you know, and as young cultural learners and as people in our community, there's so many answers that we don't have that we're going to be working our whole lives at getting. But what we can do is navigate systems to connect people with elders and knowledge keepers that have these keys. And so as planners or as people that are making influential decisions about the direction of this city, what we're saying is that you cannot do that without your housekeepers, without your hosts. You cannot have those conversations without the guidance of the people that have all the keys, that know how to take care of this place, how to thrive in this place, and how to make it so that your children can thrive in this place and their children can thrive. So I think at the end, we're going to circle around to thinking about more tangible ways that looks like. But what host is here to say, is that the rent is due, it's been due. And we're trying to help people figure out how to come together, to listen to Leonard George's call around what it means to be accountable to one another, and to think up futures together where we can thrive. And so I wanted to start by, I am wrapping up, just that was way over a minute, but I got the okay to keep talking a little bit, just to blabber out. I wanted to set the foundation around thinking about solidarity and ways that we are, as BIPOC people, inspired by the bravery and labor of others. And so by opening up where host came from, as having been inspired by like the bravery and just excellence of Black organizers and thinkers around us too, is such a important way to think about how our futures are only possible if we continue to follow in the footsteps of our ancestors who knew about how important solidarity was. And we see it in our kinship, and we see it in our bloodlines, and we see it in all throughout history around what it meant to work together, particularly as BIPOC people. And so I see it embodied now, even in the very beginnings of who we are as host consulting, and just thinking about my degree at UBC, my focus was on Indigenous feminisms, and that, again, not unlike the trajectory of being inspired by Cicely, a lot of the work of Indigenous feminists came through the exploration of Black feminisms and people thinking outside the box, and then inspiring others to do the same. So I think that the conversation around solidarity and envisioning futures together, it cannot happen without talking about these networks of kinship and these histories of rivers and how closely tied we are, and going back to thinking about Hamulchton and the place where the water mixes, thinking of our solidarity and our kinship and our blood as having that same, as Vancouver being one of those same places, the place of the mixing, and how important it is to recognize those relationships for solidarity, to dream futures up together while not collapsing the bridges of who we are and where our individual connections to place come from. And yeah, thank you for letting me put some of my thoughts down around my dreams for the homelands, and a little bit about the origin stories of host and how it's been influenced by relationships of solidarity. Thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait to hear for some thoughts from my fellow panelists. Tamato Quetzi.
Thank you so much, Celia, for your introduction. Second, we have Maggie Lowe. Maggie is the co-chair of the Indigenous Community Planning program at UBC School of Community and Regional Planning. Maggie is a community-engaged scholar who seeks to advance a better understanding of Indigenous sovereignty as it is expressed outside the Canadian courts. Her current research projects and teaching focus on Indigenous planning, Indigenous-state relations, and decolonization and reconciliation efforts happening within Canadian cities. Maggie was born and raised in Sudbury, Ontario, and is of mixed ancestry including Italian, French, German, English, and she is a status member of the Wikwemikoong Unceded Territory. Maggie has been fortunate enough to work with and for First Nations in what is now known as British Columbia, Manitoba, and Ontario. Off campus, Maggie enjoys running, camping, drinking good coffee, and eating with friends and family. Maggie, would you please like to share with us your connections of climate justice, urban planning, and racial justice, and how do these issues intersect? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Karen, for that intro. Celia, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. I could listen to you speak for the next hour. So just so appreciate that. And it also just brings, I just love listening to your language being spoken. And I am just so honored to be on this panel with such inspirational leaders and who are working so hard and doing incredible work on racial and climate justice. And also thank you so much to the organizers of this event. Some of them are my students, which is pretty cool. And the student organizations that run these events and that are basically blowing up my Instagram every day. I'm just so thankful and inspired by the work that you do. So thank you so much. So yeah, my name is Maggie Lowe, and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Community and Regional Planning at UBC. I'm coming at you from my closet office on the unceded traditional and ancestral lands of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. I'm unbelievably grateful to be an uninvited guest on these occupied lands. And sorry, I was just smiling at a comment that was made in the chat about a clavis. So I'm of mixed ancestry. From my mom's side, I'm a settler with Italian, German, and French ancestry. My grandmother was an amazing Italian woman who was born in a Northern Ontario town from Italian immigrants. My dad was born and raised in a small town in Northern Ontario called Killarney, also known as 𝗠𝗴𝗴𝗶𝗲, which is on the North Channel of Georgian Bay. And like all lands in Canada, this area has a very rich history. Much of that history dates back thousands of years, and this area was used by Anishinaabe nations. This area also has a colonial history based on fur trading, forestry, and fishing dating back to about 200 years. And Killarney was founded by a French settler, and many European settlers moved to this area and intermarried and had children with the Ojibwe and Odawa peoples of whose territory the settlement was established. And so I'm telling you this kind of history because it kind of explains kind of where I'm coming from on these issues and my intersectionality. So this area was, Killarney was complex and had interesting connections between settlers and the Indigenous folks, mainly from Manitoba Island. And through these connections, both my grandparents belonged to First Nations communities in this area, and I too am a status member of Wikwemikoong Unceded Territory on Manitoba Island. It's this generally Northern Ontario is an area that I hold very, very dear. However, I did not grow up with connections to Wikwemikoong. I did and still do have quite close ties to Killarney. My grandmother still lives there, and I have so many memories of visits in the winters and summers and doing all the snowmobiling, skiing, fishing, all those great things. But I grew up in a middle-class family in Sudbury, Ontario. I have white privilege and also a connection to my Indigenous identity. And so reflecting on that, this intersection has driven a lot of the work that they've done and that I do now and that I hope to do in the future. And so I'm just going to take a couple minutes to kind of share some of my thoughts that come from my experience in graduate school, as well as a few years now as an assistant professor at SCARP, and kind of connect it to what strengthening respectful relationships kind of looks like for me. The secret is I'm actually not a planner. My background is in environmental studies, so I'm kind of coming from it from that lens. So my love of the outdoors when I was young and being a summer camp kid led me to an undergraduate degree in environmental science at the University of Guelph. And besides a nerdy love of soil science, soil is very cool, my interest in environmental science turned to natural resource policy and environmental movements and the change that environmental movements could make at that time. This was the early 2000s. And I was lucky enough to pursue a master's degree in environmental studies at the University of Victoria. And so I moved to, yes, soil is cool. I moved to the West Coast. I moved to Vancouver Island. That was the first time in my early 20s I had been to British Columbia. And when I began my master's work, I was particularly interested in the potential of environmentalism to bring about the change we needed to save the planet. And I examined the negotiation of a set of large-scale land use agreements known as the Great Bear Rainforest Agreements. But this interest very quickly turned to Indigenous governance, because as my research unfolded, I found that the outcomes of these agreements, including 2/3 of the region being protected from old growth logging and requirements for human well-being, were dramatically reshaped by Indigenous folks in these regions and in their territories, and their demands for more decision-making authority over the resources in their territories. And so I wanted to know more about how First Nations on what is now known as BC's Central Coast were asserting their inherent jurisdictional authority. And I was lucky enough to do this through pursuing a PhD at the Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability at UBC. And I was lucky enough to develop a relationship with folks in 𝗏𝗏, BC, the main community of 𝗏𝗏 Nation, whose territory is located on the Central Coast. I'm sorry, that's a call that I will decline. When I began my research, I approached the 𝗏𝗏 Integrated Resource Management Department and asked if they had specific research questions that they needed answered. So it was really important to me that the research that I undertook would actually have meaning for the communities that I was hoping to work with. And so they responded by asking me to investigate the successes and failures of another set of political agreements that they were negotiating with the BC government at the time. And I did this. And so I moved to 𝗏𝗏 for about 1.5 years to conduct more ethnographic work and to get to know the place that I was studying. But of course, this experience was much, much more than that. And I developed lasting relationships and learned about 𝗏𝗏 territory and was able to bear witness to important business at potlatches. I also worked part-time for the band and was able to volunteer at the high school. And for the first time in my life, I was part of the visible minority and an outsider in a tight-knit community. And this was a constant feeling of feeling uncomfortable, but it was very much a good uncomfortable for me to feel. My research found, overall, my research found that 𝗏𝗏 Nation is asserting their jurisdictional authority over 𝗏𝗏 territory outside the courts, and again, in ways the Canadian governments can no longer ignore. So I won't go into the boring details of my dissertation, but well, quite interesting actually. But my research continues to be motivated by the question: what are the strategic acts happening outside the Canadian courts that are moving Indigenous sovereignty? That's moving Indigenous sovereignty forward. And fortunately, I've been able to pursue these strategic acts of sovereignty and jurisdiction through planning and at SCARP as an assistant professor in the Indigenous Community Planning program. And as part of my teaching role, I have the privilege of co-teaching a course with Musqueam staff, knowledge holders, and community members. And I've had the great privilege of learning some of the ways of being and knowing, and some of the stories that Musqueam folks are willing to share with us, which I feel immensely grateful for. In my work as an Indigenous governance and planning scholar, I've come to really believe the way we do planning research needs to be collaborative, interdisciplinary, and reciprocal. This might be intuitive to some or most of you, but truthfully and often frustratingly, this is not intuitive to planning scholars and or the university. To some, but not all, and there's a lot of work that can be done. So one thing for scholars, researchers, and planners, practitioners that we can do is to continue to shift our thinking around who the experts are. So this is one example. So who is the expert? Who has the right information and the stories? Whose stories are being left out? And of course, there are so many community experts, especially the housekeepers of these lands that Celia so beautifully talked about. And when we collaborate, importantly, when we collaborate with these experts and knowledge holders, we need to do it respectfully and with reciprocity. But with this, there's really important things we need to keep in mind as researchers. So researchers and planners need to take accountability for recognizing that community experts and knowledge holders certainly can't be exploited. We have to take great care in not knowledge mining and trying to fit different forms of knowledges, Indigenous knowledges, into Western scientific paradigms. And my academic and practicing work in planning is informed by the work of many Indigenous scholars, practitioners, and community members. Robin Kimmerer and her inspiring work, including the book Braiding Sweetgrass, comes to mind in thinking about the relationship between Indigenous knowledges and scientific knowledge. And here's a beautiful quote from her book about reciprocity. So cultures of gratitude must also be cultures of reciprocity. Each person, human or non, is bound to every other in a reciprocal relationship. Just as all beings have a duty to me, I have a duty to them. If an animal gives its life to feed me, I am in turn bound to support its life. If I receive a stream's gift of pure water, then I am responsible for returning a gift in kind. An integral part of a human's education is to know those duties and how to perform them. So I'm holding Kimmerer's words dear as I, with a large interdisciplinary team, embark on a multi-year research project called Living with Water, which is funded through the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions, and that's beginning this spring. And this project connects city and regional staff in the Lower Mainland with provincial staff and the Indigenous governments whose land this work is occurring on, with researchers at UBC, SFU, and Waterloo to work together to uphold Indigenous practices and knowledges and investigate nature-based solutions in developing adaptation plans related to sea level rise and coastal flood mitigation. So I'm very excited about this work, and I'll have to maybe come back and report back to all of you how the work is going and unfolding a year from now. So I'm constantly trying to learn, constantly work in progress. I'm working on how to embed racial and climate justice in my work in meaningful ways all the time. I try to take action to support my BIMPOC students in my classroom and my research. So for example, by considering how my decisions have implications for hiring for TA-ships, teaching assistantships and research positions, as well as recruiting for prospective graduate students. I honor the work that I get to do with students on various research projects, whether through MyTax internships or with the amazing folks at the UBC Climate Hub. I currently have the pleasure of working with 2 undergraduate students right now, helping a grassroots research project about Indigenous well-being and artificial neural networks get off the ground, and more on that research maybe in a year from now. And so I hold my responsibilities as a researcher and educator at UBC very dearly and understand this position to be an immense privilege. And my ultimate hope is to continue to conduct research and be parts of communities of practice and solidarity, and to support racial justice and facilitate student learning that will have meaningful implications for decolonizing and transforming our cities and communities. A bit about me. Thank you so much for letting me talk for 10 minutes, and I look forward to hearing from Jamira.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And last but not least, we have Jamira Lovemore, the co-founder of Black Mutual Aid BC and a member of both Black Lives Matter Vancouver and the Hogan's Alley Society. Passionate for environmental justice and water protection, she holds a Bachelor's of Science in Microbiology and plans to study Canadian groundwater policy from the lens of environmental racism. As a Black woman of both Jamaican and Montserratian heritage, Jamira is deeply invested in Black queer liberation and solidarity with First Nations. She believes that dismantling white supremacy is only the first step on our long climb to racial equity and restoration of the people's relationship with this land. Jamira, please go ahead and share with us your thoughts on the connections between climate justice, urban planning, and racial justice. How do these issues intersect? And feel free to introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for UBC Climate Hub for inviting me here. And I honestly feel very honored to be on this panel. with the Celia Joseph as well as Maggie Lowe. Both of your introductions were honestly amazing and have me thinking about so many different things. So I'm like trying to stick to what I had planned to say because I'm like, oh, I want to talk about this now. I want to get into here, but no, keeping it succinct. So, and my name is Jamira Lovemore. What I originally came here, actually, sorry, let me talk about a little background about myself first. So, as was stated, I am a first generation born in what is so-called North York, or the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Anishinaabe. I was raised in Southern Ontario, and then I moved to actually the Okanagan for my undergrad. And then I now live on the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. In the Okanagan, that was the lands of the Coast Salish or Okanagan, as well as West Bank First Nation. And here it's Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh lands that I am currently living on. When I originally was invited to this panel, the first thing that came to me was to talk about what is Black settler intersection and how does that fit into Vancouver? Because we don't talk about that a lot. The whole issue around why Hogan's Alley Society was created and what their mandate is because of the erasure of Black settlers in this city and the history there that is not talked about because of that erasure. And particularly when we're talking about Hogan's Alley Society, we're talking about that Park Lane area that is currently covered by the Georgia Viaduct. And one thing that I want to really highlight, and I'm going to get into this a little later, is how the impact that the city decisions have for long periods of time, right? Like this happened, that erasure happened years ago, but it has had a long-lasting effect on not only Black history in the city, but economic welfare for Black folks in the city, as well as social welfare for Black folks in the city. Not having a central place to go to for community is a huge thing. And that's something the Black community does not have here. Even in Ottawa, which is a very small place, there is some form of Black community. In Toronto, there's a much larger form of Black community. There's a place to go to for cultural understanding. And it's recognized that cultures do want that, do need that, right? We have cultural institutions for all types of folks' backgrounds because having that space is really important. It's good to know where you come from and get to have those people that you can go back to. And having that destroyed in Vancouver has a lot of psychological impacts on Black folks. And of course, the just not having that attachment to your history. So I just wanted to highlight like what that actually means long-term when you remove or erase somebody's history. You actually create a whole host of longer term issues that take much more resource to actually fix going forward. Yeah, so previously, my first thing was to talk about Hogan's Alley Society. What I do with Hogan's Alley Society, I actually work more with, I work as a volunteer on a project for Nora Hendricks Place. If you don't know what Nora Hendricks Place is, it's a temporary modular housing facility that's right beside the viaduct, which is coming down soon, hopefully. It's a housing space that is a transitional space for vulnerable folks. It's half Black and half Indigenous. And what we focus on is making sure that the folks there right now, especially during COVID-19, have their basic needs met. So that means we do hampers for personal items, also food items. Hogan's Alley Society also has a mandate to make sure that some cultural needs are met. So talks about like training for possible employment in the future or answering questions. Right now we're working on something to get folks more comfortable taking the vaccine. There's a lot of different things that Hogan's Alley Society chooses to support with Nora Hendricks Place, but my particular role is around the hamper project. Hogan's Alley Society came forward with a plan to reclaim our space in Northeast False Creek. And we came to the city with this whole plan that includes a land trust, because when you had that expropriation of land, taking that away, you also took away the basis of community for the Black community here in Vancouver. So we came to the city being like, we would like you to sign this. This includes a land trust so that when we build something here, you can't take it again. Like you can't do that thing you did last time. not this time. And that still has not been done. There has been an inclusion of some sort of Black community space in a Northeast Falls Creek plan, but that has not turned to be the specific thing that was asked for within our plan. And you can find more information on that if you look for Hogan's Alley Society's website. On our website, we have more details on that Northeast Falls Creek plan. So that's my little bit on Hogan's Alley Society and what that means there. Other thing I did want to talk about was actually comes from something that Celia said around what does the city look like and what is it supposed to look like. Going back to what I said previously about what choices the city makes or Metro Vancouver makes, will change what we look like for years to come. There were choices that were made when we laid down the pipes in our sewage system.
Yeah, the last one you went to.
Oh, somebody needs to be muted.
Whoever has their mic on, please mute yourself. Jamira, take it away.
Specifically, there were choices that were made around what places where will backups of sewage go, particularly when you have a lot of rain. The way our system works is that we have these things called combined sewage outflows. That means that when it rains a lot and there's too much sewage for the pipes, it doesn't go back up into your system. So you have sewage coming up in your toilet, it outflows into the environment. And where does it outflow? Well, particularly the way that engineering and city planning works is that where things are essentially deemed to be less valuable or lower income, that's where you'll have effects like that go. As a settler, as a Black settler here, I've taken some time to recognize what are some of the First Nations here looking for long-term. What is the plan? If you look what Tsleil-Waututh Nation is looking for a long-term plan, what they're saying, talking about having a sustainable harvest from Burrard Inlet. That does not work with the idea of sewage going directly into Burrard Inlet. And they have a water symposium every year to talk about this. So these are the types of things that need to be addressed when we talk about like long-term sustainability and climate solutions. It really does mean like as being a guest here, being a settler, listening to what your hosts are asking, what they're saying, and finding ways to actually work towards those solutions. And making sure that what we're choosing does not create a longer term problem of having a large amount of sewage going where somebody's choosing to have a sustainable harvest. And there's a lot of different examples for what that looks like. But when we say things like there is no climate justice without racial equality, without Indigenous sovereignty, these are the practical ways that we can address that. Another thing that Celia said was, rent is due. What does that mean? And even though there are a lot of different things that could look like, I think that the idea of like quite literally rent, right now we play rent to the city, we call it property taxes. There can be solutions that look similar to that so that we are also supporting solutions that could actually work. I used to believe, and I still do believe, that there are a lot of really good solutions to be found through Western science, as well as through, well, the word is failing me right now, through technological innovations. Those things are very real, but we have a propensity to rely on those too heavily and often expect that we'll find solutions through technological changes. And we're okay with things taking a long time because technology is going to solve it. But those solutions don't really work. Right now, Vancouver has this plan to become the greenest city in Canada. But we look at the actual plans, they don't create that. They don't create a sustainable future here. They create something that looks better, but more bike lanes is not what environmental sustainability looks like. And so we do have to acknowledge that what we're choosing to put up on a pedestal to solve our problems does not do that. And we have to go from that, okay, if this does not work, then maybe it's time, as Celia Joseph and as Maggie Lowe said, to start listening to folks who we would not normally choose or put on that pedestal because we don't recognize that intelligence the same way. It's time to look at other knowledge keepers and what they have in terms of solutions and knowledge as very, very important, as something that we can actually put in place and put a higher priority on those solutions. So that's just a little bit on my thoughts as a Black settler and what we can do to actually move that needle forward in terms of the intersection between race and culture and class and environmentalism, environmental sustainability, pardon me. I could go on, but I'm gonna cut myself off there and let us get into the next segment of this. I'm sure that my other points I'm here, I'll pop in later. So thank you very much again, and I'll right there.
Thank you so much, Jamira. Thank you, Celia and Maggie as well. We're going to wrap up this conversation to make time for a Q&A. If you guys haven't submit your questions into the Slido, feel free to do so now. But I just wanted to say that hopefully all of us carry this with us in our work, and that we learn from and continue to understand the means to build and strengthen respectful relationships with the Black and Indigenous community. Again, feel free to drop any questions in the Slido while you still can. And Pablo, feel free to take it away now. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. We had some sidebar chats, I think, and we were just like, well, we could just go for a couple more hours and probably lose track of time just hearing all of your amazing stories and knowledge that you shared with us. So just deeply grateful for you joining us today. I'll just quickly introduce myself. So I'm Pablo. I'm actually one of those students that Maggie mentioned earlier. So I'm extremely grateful also to have Maggie as an instructor, and just a great, kind person to bounce ideas off of. And thank you again, Celia and Jamira. For this next section, I'm just keeping an eye on some of the great questions that are coming in right now. So maybe just to start, I think one of the questions that we can kind of start with as a warm-up is kind of has to do with maybe a lot of what has already been talked about already in this in some of your openings, just around how important it is to kind of think holistically and think about planning in a bit more long-term, incorporating reciprocity. And one of the things, I myself being in some of the climate adaptation world, is there's always sort of a separation between conversations around mitigating climate change, reducing climate change impacts, and then also preparing for climate impacts. And a lot of it happens even just because professionally, or the way colonial institutions are created, they really segment people into different areas, even though these discussions should really be happening at a holistic level. So the question just really is, and this can also be conversational, as I think it'd be great to hear sort of a little bit of your ideas as they bounce off of one another. Just the question around what you see as linkages between some of mitigating and adapting to climate impacts, as well as maybe even just thinking more broadly, like what does holistic planning look like in your field or in your community?
I feel like there's so many like little questions in that question. It was a multi-layered question. But I was just thinking about I was like, how can we keep these conversations going? I was like, Jamira, I was just so inspired by what you were talking about around how like the impact of erasure and the long-term impact of these decisions. And I think like I have all these notes scribbled in my book that it was so ambitious to think I would ever even get to say them. There's so many thoughts, but one of them here is I have decisions that the city has made. So, and I have in brackets, showing up with barges to our Kitsilano Reserve and forcing our membership onto them. And then people came home from hunting trips and their family was gone, that's a story of erasure in the city, or the burning of longhouses in Central Park. And so I only know what I know. I don't know what I don't know, and so I think in terms of having intersectional dialogues around erasure and around presence and futures, sitting down with people who have shared interests in vibrant futures, you know, so we can learn about each other is so important. You know, I really want to learn more about Hogan's Alley's history and your organization and the work you're doing and where the intersections are for collaboration, you know, and how you build bridges without collapsing difference. It seems like such like a, like, I don't know, like PG-13, like family network saying, you know, like how to build bridges without collapsing differences. But I constantly use it in my head to think about creating dialogues for solidarity that still let you be who you are and have your own individual struggles while looking out for one another. So my response is vague, but I think that a really crucial and important way forward is just creating more spaces like this for dialogue to like get on the same page about how to support one another and move forward, and to keep learning about those in order to understand where we are and the implications of where we've come from. We just have to keep learning about what other people have been through here in this city and where our intersections are. I think that, yeah, you can't go anywhere if you don't know where you came from, you know?
Just to follow off of what you just said there, Celia, when I fully agree with everything you said, I think that creating more spaces like this to have dialogues and to recognize where our starting point are very, very important. But the work cannot stop there. I think that when people get into these spaces and they see what's going on and they understand the different perspectives, go back to, you know, what is most important to you. You know, like for instance, like and Adriana knows this about me, like I'm a scatterbrain, I love everything. And I will literally pick up every single flag, but I have a couple things that are most important to me. You know, like financial security is a huge thing, as well as water. Water is incredibly important and we don't value it nearly enough. So when I think about the things that I want to focus on, what I'm learning about, I go back to those two things constantly. And so when you're in these spaces, you know, understand, figure out what it is that you want to learn, and then get into those two topics, because you actually have so much power to make changes, right? Like we give our institutions a lot of power when we believe in them, right? But we also pay for them to do this work. We talk about the long-term work that, you know, the city or Metro Vancouver or whatever institution has, you know, they make a choice, city planning, and it ends up being, you know, it has ramifications for 80 to 100 years afterwards. Well, we pay for that. So when you take the time to get into these spaces and you see what's going on, and then you choose a lane that you want to work on more, you can then impact that and make sure that things don't suck again for 100 years in the future, right? Like we have that impact with things we can do right now. Somebody mentioned in the chat that City of Vancouver is actually changing the CSO program. They're actually separating these two lanes so they don't have the water lines mixed with the sewage, which is great. It's going to take a couple decades and it's going to cost millions, if not billions of dollars. That's money that could be going to a lot of other things instead it's fixing an old problem. Now, like obviously, like not saying that they had a better solution then, but it's just that if we were using Indigenous knowledge at that time, we might not be in this situation. So always understand that power dynamic can be disrupted and you can always choose that too.
Yeah, totally. And I think that like what was so interesting to me is like thinking about how as BIPOC people we can be accountable to one another. You know, I'm not talking necessarily about other institutions, but even just thinking about where our histories overlap and thinking about what it means to buy back that space and what other stories lay beneath, you know, what others like, and how to meet each other at those intersections with the shared history to space and land it's really exciting. And I think the spring and fall, or like throughout like an emergence of the like eruption of dialogues around Black Lives Matter becoming more vocal or like more on the forefront, I think from that will come tangible conversations that lead to like tangible actions and direct action from BIPOC communities. And I think that it's like there's so many amazing things that can come from these shared dialogues continuing to happen, you know.
I'll give Maggie a second if she wanted to join that conversation too. But
Oh, I'm just taking it in because I can't help but think about how, like, it's almost a call to action, you know, to me too, like, how can I work to bring these dialogues into my classroom, and, you know, how do I work within the university to really support these important conversations and action to happen. And so I'm just mulling all of that over right now, but I just wanted to add that that's kind of where I come from.
Yeah, there's also a lot of really great questions that are popping up in the public Q&A. So I might just maybe start with this one here. So question one being, how does language within the urban setting, how does it need to change to really recognize that? This might really go back to Celia, your point around being able to, you know, see yourself and be reflected in the city scape. So, you know, what in the urban setting needs to change to really recognize the city having such a buried history?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I like, we're at this interesting point in time with like a few years following the Truth and Reconciliation Commission with calls to action and that buzzword of reconciliation. You have more and more people that are like that come knocking at your door to like indigenize or decolonize or whatever. And it's really hard to sift through people that are doing this work because of like intentionality and because of that are coming through a critical lens that are looking for tangible change or where it's like performative and or where it's like lip service and it's like you're doing this because it's the status quo, you're not maybe sure why, and it's going to end at your acknowledgement, you know? So we're at this interesting time where we're asking people to move beyond the acknowledgement to action, to paying that rent. And so I think when you have MST driven projects around our like the representation of our people in this city, if we're steering the ship, then you'll know that we're going to create representation certainly through language and design and art that makes us feel at home in our city, that we're creating for our people. Where it goes awry is when you have organizations that are like, okay, this is how we're going to show MST representation, and now that we've created how we want this to look, now we're going to reach out to find the people to do it. That's when it gets really hard. If you make these decisions without our input from the beginning, and language is an interesting one. Having been involved in the language for a number of years, we often get people that are like, hey, could you translate this entire like museum catalog into Squamish? And it would like, I'm like, don't think you understand. I was like, we have like 10 to 15 speakers in the world that could do that, you know, like less than that, you know? And so, and they're busy trying to teach our community to speak, like my team that I support through 𝗠𝗴𝗴𝗶 𝗟ci𝘄, like they're on the ground in language immersion 40 hours a week. They're on Zoom 8 hours a day. And so is this translation of the brochure, is that for you? Or is that for Squamish people? Because it doesn't really feel like it's for Squamish people, you know? So I think that when you have MST peoples at the table from the get-go, then they can flag those things, you know, and we can help create representation that is accessible and feels vital for us. And language is certainly a part of that when it's coming at the request of our people, not because an organization is like from the top down, they think that this is what's helpful or it's going to make them look good. And but certainly what makes everybody look good and feel the best is when when consultation happens from the very beginning to, and you're asking like, what, like, how can I help? What can I do? How can, this is what our organization has to offer. Like, let's dream up something together. That's the best model in my mind.
I was just going to quickly say, when it comes to language in the urban setting, to recognize cities' varied history, Blackness is rarely acknowledged. You won't see people say the word Black. People don't say it. I think it brings up a lot for white settlers, and maybe there's guilt going on in the background. People don't say Black, and it's a problem because BIPOC is important, but people's particular histories are important as well. We don't say Asian, we say Chinese, because the Chinese history here is very, very important. We talk about Japanese people and their settling here as well, very important. Every single group deserves to be acknowledged for what their history is and what's happening here. And when we talk about Black people and like Black history here, it's rarely actually stated. We don't talk about what was Hogan's Alley, why were Black people there? Because they quite literally could not say anywhere else. And people were porters and they're working on the railroads, and that rail is right there. So when we talk about language that's missing in the urban setting, I'm gonna just straight up, we have to acknowledge Blackness. That's step one in terms of, like, for me, where I'm coming from here. Acknowledging things for what they are. Talking about what's happening in that particular space, acknowledging what's going on there, not just, oh, the city's racist history in X or Y place. Talk about what's happening there and speak it out fully. If we can't use the right words, then we're not going to get anywhere. So that's a big one. And that goes for every group and wherever that is happening.
Yeah, thank you for your responses. I think, wow, there's there's so much to kind of think about in terms of what you've shared. And I think maybe a lot of it ties into this next question around a lot of these, obviously, like the erasure of Blackness in the city, or, just the colonial practices that get replicated through, city planning departments, or there's, for those who really want to make that effort, or really want to, really push those forward as allies in those types of positions. The question here is really, what are the indicators of good decision-making processes in urban planning for these types of discussions around racial and climate justice? So maybe I'll leave it at that, but I think there would be a lot of planners or people thinking about going into planning who have to kind of think about, what does meaningful engagement look like? What does, how do you incorporate monitoring and evaluation in a meaningful way? I'd be really interested to hear all of your thoughts on
that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, what immediately comes to mind is something that was just talked about in that, I think Celia was talking about this, and there's so many requests now because there's so many. Oh man, my phone keeps going off while I'm talking. Sorry, I'm not that popular. There's so many requests now happening and I brought this up too, we need to think about community experts, or our idea about experts differently, and community experts need to be highly valued. So kind of in that vein, as a good indicator, is this a good decision? Is this a project I should take on? Is this a community engagement that's, good, let's say, is just like, is the request coming from the community? Like where's the need, or where's it coming from? Is it coming from that particular community? Are the questions, are the outcomes of what's being talked about going to somehow benefit the community? That's kind of like my go-to kind of question especially when I'm asked to take on research projects or students want to work with particular communities or things like that. That's kind of where I go to first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just reading the question, and it says in the end, in particular, the context of MST territories. I think like just working off what you're saying, Maggie, I just think that it's absolutely crucial that that the involvement of MST voices doesn't like it has to move beyond the acknowledgement and there have been so many events where you're having important conversation and you bring together all these minds, but the MST representation, it's just the welcome. It's just a performance in the beginning and then that's it. And it's such a loss for people to have that engagement stop there, you know, because I mean, like people love Indigenous like art and they love like our songs, but they just don't like our people very much, you know, or our politics, and they certainly don't like to talk about land, because then all of a sudden people are implicated, you know. So I think that having given MST people have been caring and advocating for these territories for thousands of years and lived here in reciprocal and like harmonious ways and sovereign ways, you know, these conversations just have to include our people from the get-go and be driven by and the direction needs to be led by these people, you know, because as I mentioned in my opening, you know, there's all the keys and all the secrets are in our blood and in our territories about how to care for this space, you know, how like, and it comes that gets embodied in so many ways. And so I think that the city as like a whole, not just like the governance of Vancouver, but I think people make a mistake at doing lip service and performative work with the host nations when there's actually so many, there's Indigenous brilliance like all around here to be learning from. And I find that when it comes to science and the underpinning of so many Western approaches to environmentalism and stuff, it's really just underpinned by Indigenous knowledge, you know, and by things that we've always known about how to take care of this land and how the symbiotic relationship and ecosystem works, you know, like, yeah, our people know. So just ask us, you know.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Maggie and Celia. There's, I think, time maybe for one more question, which might be, I got the thumbs up from Adriana, so perfect. Which actually might be a good segue into closing remarks that 𝗠𝗴𝗴𝗶𝗲 will be inviting you to share. This question is, I think, touches on maybe quite a number of things that have been shared, but really just an opportunity for people to think about, you know, how can settlers and non-Black folks show up for racial and climate justice when we're specifically talking about urban planning, and perhaps we can even gear it to in the context that we're in right now on UBC being in the Musqueam Squamish Tsleil-Waututh and in that context specifically. It's a big question, so anyway, and that's a hard one to
One thing that I can quickly say is that, and this is not indicative to all settlers and non-Black folks, but particularly for settlers and non-Black folks that live at an intersection of high class privilege, they can really use that to uplift the things that are being said by Black folks and Indigenous folks who are trying to get some of this work done, but simply do not have the capacity or financial ability to be able to just take the time to do all that, right? There's a lot of the work that really means to promote what these ideals are before they're recognized by mainstream or by Western science is unpaid labor. And if you don't have the means to do unpaid labor for long periods of time, your voice just does not get heard. So something that settlers and non-Black folks can do is to uplift those voices that they're hearing and to put their money or their time into actually bringing those things forward.
Yeah, I think it like just totally like agreeing with what you're saying and rolling off that. We have a teaching where when ceremony's happening, you stay till the last elders there, you know? So like if people are staying there till the very end, you sure can too, right? And so I think in thinking about different intersections and levels of privilege, if your BIPOC colleagues and community members are doing the work and they're staying till the end, you know, you can too. And like thinking also about like what it means to be in that intersection and in ceremony when there are people that when you have more privilege than others, you just try and use that. Like in ceremony, we bring food to those that it's harder for them to walk, you know, or we bring food to them, and we stay up in the kitchen and we cook and then we clean up at the end of the night, you know. Like if you can do something that somebody else can't do, then you best do it, you know. I'm just like using ceremony as an analogy, but like there's like no such thing as idle hands. Like somebody's always helping. There is always work to do. And when you don't know what that work is, it really truly is amazing to just like hold the sentence always, like, how can I help? You know, just like to show up and to where the work's happening and just say, how can I help? You know, and follow people's lead, because there's always jobs. I'm a new entrepreneur, run a business, and I have a nonprofit, and I wish more people would ask me, how can I help? You know, like this one settler, Michael, he came up to us one day. He's a grant writer, and he's just like, he decided because he's living here, he wants to just do a certain amount of his work pro bono. And he came up to CAS one day and he just simply said to us, how can I help? And he started just writing grants for us. And I keep trying to pay the guy and he won't let me, you know? And so it's like, there's so many amazing examples of people that have just shown up and just asked, what can I do that's helpful, you know? And it can go a long way, but just keep it in your minds that there's people still at the ceremony working, like you got to be working too.
On that point too, in the chat box too, there's actually some really concrete ways to follow up on some of that discussion. So please do check out that Google document that was shared. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing that. Maybe
one quick
yeah, go ahead.
This is a little like tangential. It's gonna be a little like woo woo girl, but I'm gonna say it. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about right now, you know, moving towards a more just and equitable future, for a lot of folks, it's just going to make them feel uncomfortable, right? These are uncomfortable conversations, and it's like, you feel away. So one thing I learned recently, I have a friend who started taking ice baths. So you don't have to start doing that, but start doing something that makes you uncomfortable so that you can sit in the uncomfort of what it means to actually change your perspective. Because being uncomfortable with an idea, if that holds you back from making the change, then we're just going to have these conversations for the next 100 years. Mm-hmm. People have to be okay with sitting in the discomfort and recognizing that that is where you start to change. So finding a way that you can start getting uncomfortable every day. Maybe it's eating broccoli, you know, like, I don't know, whatever, something that it makes you uncomfortable. So you start doing that, and then you can situate yourself in that feeling, and don't let that center yourself when you're in that uncomfortable position when we're actually trying to move things forward. So find something that makes you uncomfortable, start doing that, and then you can be uncomfortable when we actually need you to be so that we can move forward.
I love that idea. Go ahead.
I just really like that, Jamira. Thank you for that. I'm picturing the sitting in an ice bath. Like, I hate cold showers, so maybe we have to do that. I know they're the worst, but I just really, I wanted to echo my two amazing panelists, fellow panelists, on what they just talked about. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm almost foreseeing another Google spreadsheet that is just all the ways we can practice sitting sitting in our discomfort. And yeah, I could use some tips too and learn some new ways to do that.
Neurological thing for it too. Like you literally are like changing your brain pathway so that you don't just instantly go into like fight or flight. Like there's a whole like biochemistry, neurochemical like foundation for this. It's not totally crazy.
I'm here for it.
No, it's very timely, actually. I just had my doctor basically prescribe me cold showers, so I was laughing at Maggie's comment too. I gotta shake up my neurology.
That is so funny. You should all know, as people on host nation territory, that like winter baths and being up in like going into cold water all winters, it's part of like our culture and who we are. So I know, right? The symbioticness of what you're saying is so interesting to me. And that's why I always laugh when people are like, talk about the medical benefits of cold water immersion. I'm like, here we are, it's come full circle again. And it just reminds me of like in Smoke Signals, which if you haven't seen, you have to, it's an Indian classic. And he's like, all the hippies are just trying to be Indians anyway. That's like how I feel about science. Like, this is all just Indigenous knowledge anyway.
Oh, that's great. On that note, I will. I'm just extremely grateful for being able to just kind of sit back and listen to all of you, and just yeah, thank you again for sharing. And will at this point hand it to 𝗠𝗴𝗴𝗶𝗲, who will invite you to share closing thoughts. So, 𝗠𝗴𝗴𝗶𝗲.
Okay, thanks so much, Pablo, and thanks so much our speakers. That was amazing. But we want to thank everyone for coming to our event and participating in the way that you did. The questions were really great and sparked some interesting discussion points, and I learned a lot from that personally. And it's important that we continue to have these conversations and to never forget that racial justice is part and parcel of environmental and climate justice. It's really important. And we want to give a special thanks to our speakers who've been so great tonight. And they've given us their time, energy, and knowledge, and we're so grateful. It was so good. And I'll just give a few moments to for each speaker to give their final words. Maybe we could go in the order of how you did the speaking. So Celia, you can take it over. And then after, Audrey will wrap us up with some final words.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for creating a space that felt so reciprocal to me. Like, I feel like I was sharing some thoughts out loud, which I love. I appreciate the time to articulate things out loud. And then to be able to hear my fellow panelists speak to, and then the dialogue that's come from that, I feel like I'm leaving with so much more than I came with. And I just can't wait for more dialogues that feel like that are exciting and that leave me with so many questions and thirsty to learn more, particularly about how other people relate to this city, because I'm so siloed in many ways in like survival of a language, it's so immediate and has required so much of my time, and so being able to slowly start to step out of that with and look up a little bit more from my language silo with host, it's just inspiring to think of all the future relationships for solidarity that will inform this work moving forward. And yeah, I just thank you all so much. I really appreciate being asked to share some thoughts and share this time with you. And thank you to my mom, auntie, and best friend Julie that are in the audience. I love when I love when family comes and shows up to these things. It means a lot to me. So thank you all so much for your time. 𝗠𝗴𝗴𝗶𝗲 𝗟ci𝘄.
On a very similar vein of love and gratitude for being asked to be on this panel and share this time with all of you. I just, yes, thank you. And to share a secret, I get very nervous about things like this. So doing this was something that was helpful for me and pushed me in important ways. And so I really am appreciative of that opportunity. And yeah, just some closing thoughts, or it's really resonated with me, was like how to continue to push to have these dialogues, bring it into my classroom, support my students as best I can, and figure out, and not only that, but figure out how to respect and honor the housekeepers of these lands, and how to pay rent. And I'm really taking that with me. And thank you all.
Thank you to UBC Climate Hub for inviting me to this panel. This has actually been a wonderful experience. I've learned quite a lot today, and I'm excited to take some of these ideas back into my own work. I was going to quickly add just a little action item for everyone out here. It's a small one, so don't worry, it's not like homework. But just because we're talking about the city and urban planning and climate action and regional planning, I would urge you to go to the City of Vancouver's website and read up on their Green City Plan, as well as their climate action emergency plans, with the lens of what we discussed today. Recognizing that if you are living in this city, you have every right to have your voice heard. And so if you are looking at that and you're seeing issues, particularly with the intersections that we talked about today, you can voice those. And we all have a part to play in terms of changing this. As Celia said, we're accountable to one another. So taking that seriously just means, checking these things out, recognizing what maybe the issues might be and just voicing those, and uplifting those whose voices you see that are not being heard. So yeah, thanks for having me here, and adieu.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I don't even know how to express the level of gratitude I feel right now. I really want to thank all of the speakers for your incredible wisdom, your amazing and necessary work, and your generosity for sharing that with us today. I'm sure I'm not speaking just for myself here, but I'm super excited to continue to work alongside one another and to deepen our relationships and solidarity work with you, and to continue supporting the work you're doing and the communities that we're supporting here. So big message of heartfelt gratitude. Thank you so much. Before we leave, I just wanted to remind folks that this event is a part of our annual Climate Solutions Showcase. We have a couple more events lined up this semester. We have one event focused on extractive companies and mining in Latin America. We've got some incredible Indigenous youth from Latin America who are speaking on this on March 11th. We've also got an event on the intersections of gender and environmental justice. We've got some incredible folks lined up for that as well. And we also have an event planned on climate reparations. So keep your eye out for those. Follow us on social media so you can keep track of those. And just another quick thing, kind of more on the technical side of things, we've got a feedback form. If you have 1 minute, it's literally 4 questions. If you have 1 minute, please fill it out. Your feedback is really, really valued and truly does make a big difference in terms of how we plan our future events. And like I said, please just follow us on social media for more details to come. And yeah, thank you again to the speakers. Thank you so much for attendees for coming and for showing up the way you did and for being attentive. Thank you so much. Big message of gratitude to everyone. We're really, really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Just the slow wave. Goodbye.
Just like for a minute, like on Zoom, like that awkward moment when no one knows, like.
Queen wave. It's the cupped hand and like the.
Yeah.
So good. Celia and Jamira, I just wanted to say it was such a pleasure to meet you and do this. And I wanted to email you this morning and be like, oh, I'm so excited and I feel so honored and I'm so sorry I didn't.
Yeah.